So welcome to video 1. This is covering sexuality in the American military, and I do have notes to keep myself in check, so if you hear papers moving, then that's why. So let's get started. So basically, sexuality has been an issue since the beginning of America, essentially. Sodomy has actually been grounds for discharge from the military since the American Revolutionary War. It got put into policy officially for the first time, I believe, when Harry Truman signed the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and that was in 1950. Now, basically, the Article 25 of that covers sodomy specifically. And now they describe sodomy, and I'm going to read this. It says, any person who engages in unnatural carnal copulation with another person of the same or opposite sex is guilty of sodomy. And it goes on to say the penetration, however slight, is sufficient to complete the offense. Now, that's interesting because it does discuss both same and opposite sex, but I'm pretty sure that most cases of sodomy were looked at with same-sex relations. And then it also talks in Article 133, it says if you're convicted of conduct unbecoming of an officer and a gentleman, that it's grounds for discharge. Now, that can easily be associated with sodomy or homosexuality, because especially in 1950, they would see that as activity that's unbecoming of a gentleman and an officer. So kind of is covered in both of those articles. The next instance of discrimination regarding homosexuality in the military was seen when Ronald Reagan signed the Defense Directive. That was in 1982. Part H of the Defense Directive clearly discusses homosexual conduct as grounds for discharge. They say that can be anything from homosexual acts, a statement by a member that demonstrates a propensity or intent to engage in homosexual acts, or homosexual marriage or attempted homosexual marriage. It does state in there that that's grounds for dismissal, not because it reflects that you're homosexual, but because it shows intent to engage in homosexuality. So there's not an issue with who you are as a homosexual, but actually taking part in the actions of homosexuality. But it does say that that's grounds for dismissal, except in a few cases, which I found this exceptionally interesting, because it says if you can argue that's your departure from your customary behavior. So if that's not your normal behavior and maybe you're just experimenting, or it was a lapse of judgment or something, then they can keep you in if you're convincing enough. Also, if you can convince them that it's unlikely to recur, then they'll keep you in. And my favorite, I think, is if your continued service in the military is consistent with the interest of the armed forces, then that's grounds for you to stay in, even though you engaged in homosexual acts. So basically, if it's convenient for the military for you to stay in, then they're going to disregard it, and it's no longer an issue of importance. When you are separated from the military because of homosexual activity, it says that basically you would be dismissed under other than honorable conditions. So it's not an honorable discharge, it's not a dishonorable discharge. The next instance of the topic being brought up in as far as policy is concerned is Bill Clinton, as part of his campaign, promises to get rid of the ban in the military, and that was in 1992. Now, when he actually is elected president in 1993, Don't Ask, Don't Tell is introduced as a compromise. Basically, there's a bill from Congress with text stating that the military has to abide by the regulations that are set forth in the Defense Directive. Now, in response to this, basically, Clinton provides that although this must be upheld, that no individual should be able to be asked about their sexuality. So, and thus, Don't Ask, Don't Tell is born. Don't ask, don't tell. Now, it doesn't provide a whole lot of progress, because essentially, if any aspect of homosexuality, bisexuality, anything like that is found out, it's still grounds for discharge from the military. And it basically just looks like a political move. And so because of that, Clinton ends up with a reputation of being rather anti-gay. And maybe to resolve this, or better his reputation among the gay community, he 10 years later, mind you, requests an end of the ban. I guess you could say that this request was somewhat ignored because 3 years later, the Supreme Court shows an overwhelming support for Don't Ask, Don't Tell. They actually unanimously ruled that universities could have funding withheld if they don't allow recruiters to go to their school on the grounds of anti-discrimination policy. Now, to explain this a little bit better, public universities typically have anti-discrimination policy to protect their students, and it's usually pretty extensive. So allowing recruiters in who are upholding Don't Ask, Don't Tell, which is essentially discrimination policy against homosexuals, is going against anti-discrimination policies of the university. So the Supreme Court ruled that if they continue to act in this manner, if they continue to not allow recruiters in based on that, then they can have funding withheld. Beyond this, the notion of Don't Ask, Don't Tell policies are actually upheld in federal court 5 times. So it's not like this was not discussed. It's not like it was kept out. It was actually going through the system and being upheld as it being okay and constitutionally just. 2 years after this, we actually see another campaign promise, and now this time it's Obama's campaign, and this is similar to Clinton's promise to remove Don't Ask, Don't Tell. This seems to have a little bit more success because 2 years later, in 2010, the House and a committee in the Senate actually approved an amendment to an annual defense spending bill, which puts an end to the ban. There is a provision in there that this end would be pending a study conducted by the Pentagon, but this actually adds a little bit of momentum to ending the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. And to put this in timeline perspective, that was in May. And then in September, this is the next kind of step in the timeline. In September of 2010, a California federal judge actually ruled the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy as unconstitutional. This is huge because this is the first federal step in the right direction towards getting this policy repealed. Back to Congress, the Congress fight that's going on. Even after the provision and even after the approval of the amendment in the Senate committee and the House passed the amendment, but the Senate rejected it. And then in November of 2010, specifically November 30th, the study that was asked to be conducted by the Pentagon is released. And the concluding results are basically that, and I quote, military service members regard gays in the military as a low risk to armed forces abilities and effectiveness. So this is a great step in the direction of progress for removing this policy. Even after this report is released, that was in the end of November, November 30th. Later in December 9th, so only a couple weeks later, the Republicans in the Senate filibustered the vote that was supposed to take place that was to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And so basically the House created their own repeal, and they passed it on December 15th. And 3 days later, it's sent to the Senate, and they passed the repeal, and that was actually at a 65-31 vote. And then it continued, and that calls for the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but it's still progressing through the court system. And finally, there's a decision in the federal courts on July 6th. It's in the Federal Appeals Court, that barred further enforcement from the U.S. military to continue to ban openly gay service members. And that's sent to Congress on the 22nd of July, and this is in 2011 again. And that sets the end of the ban for 60 days from that date. And in this 60 days, actually the point of it is to allow service members to be trained and prepare them for this new life, basically, that they're going to be witnessing. So now, basically, 60 days from that day, they were concerned that now people can be openly gay, and they were concerned about how people are going to react to this, the hate crimes that are going to come out of this. So 1.9 of the 2.2 million service men and women were trained in preparation for the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. And I find this kind of interesting. Basically, the training sessions lasted 45 to 75 minutes, and they were given to groups of 50 to 250 people. They used PowerPoint presentations, obviously, and they also used discussion of hypothetical situations. And let's see, basically, to give you a couple examples, one of the hypothetical situations where you had two male service members and they were showing affection, holding hands, kissing, or hugging, and they were, even though they were in civilian clothes in the mall. And so basically they asked how you should react to this. And basically the conclusion drawn is it has to be seen as an acceptable level of public display of affection for a service member regardless of their sexuality. Now, if it's an acceptable level for a man and a woman, then it's also an acceptable level for a man and a man, or a woman and a woman. And then the next, another example is they also asked what kind of action can be taken or should be taken if a male service member is seen in a known gay bar. And the result of that is that you can't make an establishment off limits to a service member simply because it caters to gay clientele. So basically, these are all steps in the right direction. It's actually making it a more level playing field. Now, this does not make the military, completely pro-gay rights. Now, I mean, of course, Don't Ask, Don't Tell is repeal. It's not allowed to be implemented anymore. But there are other issues, mostly associated with the Defense of Marriage Act. The gay and lesbian couples are still not allowed to have base housing together. They still can't have health insurance. So if you're married, if you're a man in the military and you're, well, not married, even if you are married or have a civil union, or if you're in a partnership with another man, that health insurance that's offered to you is not able to be transferred to your partner. Which basically, if I was married to a man and he was in the military, I would get benefits from him being in the military as far as health insurance is covered. Same with death benefits, same with legal counseling, access to different things on base, such as the commissary and things like that. So basically, there's still a long way to go with military rights.